which which is always a good starting point. So I'm Martin McKenna, and I used to run face-to-face events. For obvious reasons, I'm not doing that so much anymore. In fact, I did a calculation, and at my last event, I had 350 people. If we all socially distanced, that meant that the queue to get in was going to be half a mile long. So I guess I won't be doing that again anytime soon. However, I didn't want to lose the vibe of that type of conference and event. So that's where the ITOM hubs have come in. And we've already ran 3 hubs with Heineken, Virgin Money and Thames Water. They've all been really great. You can go onto the ITOM Hub group and have a look at the information about that and some of the pre-recordings we did of those sessions. The last one with Thames Water, Tony McCandless, CIO, gave us his top tip, and that was to rip out your CMDB and start again with discovery. Okay, and to say the least, that's somewhat thought-provoking. I think we'd all like to just rip out our CMDB, because over the years we've probably got this sort of leaning tower of Pisa effect where we keep chucking stuff in and chucking stuff in, and eventually we'd love to just, rip it all out. But I guess we're all scared that the whole lot's just going to come tumbling down on top of us. So, and that also brought to mind something which I heard in an illustrious Facebook group that I'm a member of, full of thought leaders and ITIL experts, where they were asked, what was the worst thing you ever said as a consultant? And the most popular or unpopular answer was start with the CMDB. And to me, that just goes to show that even now, the CMDB is a big challenge. And in particular, because of course it's now full of cloud stuff and things being spun up left, right and center. How do we get a grip on that? Can we start again and rebuild the whole lot? Well, luckily, we've got somebody with us today who is going to share a few of the options and hopefully provide a few answers. And that's James, and we'll introduce him in a moment. But as we run through the session, for once, it's not rude to chat. So we've got the chat area up. It's Microsoft Teams. You all know how to use that. James will be asking a couple of questions of you. Please jump in on the chat. We've got other people monitoring stuff. So as we go along, we can answer questions. James is going to be a bit busy staring at the screen and presenting and being intense. So we'll stop at various points, maybe halfway, and have a look at some of the Q&A if we need to. They may well be answered as we go along. We've also got, or at least some people, depending on how Microsoft have rolled things out, will have the raise hand facility. So we may ask you, if the question looks particularly complicated, to raise your hand and maybe switch on your mic and join us in that particular fashion. So I guess that's all of the policing for today. If there's a fire alarm, then your house is on fire. If you want to go to the toilet, it's probably through the door behind you somewhere. Please maintain social distancing and wash your hands. Old habits die hard. That's my housekeeping days from running events. So now that I've gabbled on for a few minutes, that's given people a chance to join the session, and we can now push things over to the real person that you want to listen to. So over to subject matter expert James Hammond of ITOM Solutions. Take the stage.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming along. Appreciate that it is, for those in the UK, stuck in a major heat wave. So, thanks very lot for coming along and joining us for the next hour. So introduce myself. I'm one of the solution architects over at ITOM Solution, and my main areas are actually discovery and the CMDB. And that, so hopefully we can go through and answer Tony's question in that, and that's how we're going to be pulling through the session today. So I'm just going to jump over to my amazing slideshow that I have in place, and essentially this is it. We're going to be taking our CMDB to the next level. CMDB has been a swear word in a lot of places, but depending on who you are and where you sit, it's still the highlight and heart of everything that should be done within these types of systems of record. So based on Tony's thing, I've kind of got a question here. What do people honestly think is probably the best solution to get their CMDB back in order? Do you just rip it out and rebuild it from scratch, or do you retrofit it? So if you want to stick some comments in the system, that'd be great. See if there's anyone in the chat who wants to put something out, say, yeah, that's great. Yes, it's not. That. What do you think is a good idea? Martin's got the best idea. He always wants to rip it out, and bless you, Martin. With that, I would want to rip it out as well because it causes too many problems. So just to give you kind of a flavor of where I'm going to go, we're going to start with the basics. What is a CMDB with that in the first place, for those of you who don't know with that? And then I'm going to go into ServiceNow's model, which is the CSDM. What is it? Why do we use it? What are we looking for from this particular model? We're going to kind of go into a little bit more about retrofit and rebuild based on these bits and pieces. And then I'm going to go into my personal favorite, which is retrofitting an existing CMDB. Always a good one. So, question, what is a CMDB? It is the configuration management database. And ITIL describes it as the database used by an organization to store information about hardware and software assets, commonly referred to as configuration items. But from a ServiceNow point of view, to get the most out of the platform and the most out of the products that you can get in there, we have to refer it as basically at the heart of your ServiceNow implementation. Whenever you're dealing with any type of ITSM-based thing or even ITOM-based stuff, you're always dealing with something that actually exists within the organization. You have to figure out why you're doing something in the first place. You can't just raise an incident for something that doesn't exist. Otherwise, what are you trying to fix in the first place? You can't have an alert coming in for something that doesn't exist. So the CMDB is the heart of the ServiceNow implementation, the best way to get it out of the platform and the best way to ensure that you get the most value for your money. So to help model these bits and pieces, ServiceNow operates this concept of a everything as a service system. And with that, they introduced this concept of the CSDM, or the Common Services Data Model. And it's basically a framework, or they call it a framework, a blueprint. But the idea is that by putting the records that you use in certain tables within ServiceNow and building on this concept that whatever you put in the CMDB is delivering a service, whether that's internally to your stakeholders or externally to your customers. You are delivering something to them. It could be a physical laptop, it could be a connection to a service, it could be an API, it could be anything that you're dealing with. But the idea is that it's a service. You are serving somebody with these bits. And this is the main concept that we're trying to get across with the model. So currently the model is in version 2. With that, I believe they're currently working on version 3. But just to kind of give you a stack up of what they see as the model, is it gives you 3 kind of areas to work in. One is your business domain, understanding what the business is looking for, what its capabilities are, where it fits in with certain areas, and what applications it uses to deliver that from a top level section. You then have the concept of a service. And this is where the portfolio side comes in, service portfolio management, actually looking at where our services sit. And then those services are then linked to the applications and the CIs that actually deliver them within the system. So based on that, ServiceNow has 3 types of services that they deliver out of the box. One is the concept of a business service. This is a type of what you publish to your business users, whether that's your end customers or the stakeholders within the business, that underpins one or more of the business's capabilities. So, for example, if the business has the capability of communicating with its customers, with that, you may have a call center application, or you may have a customer service website. These are business services to deliver some value to these people. The second one that they use is the concept of a technical service. This is a service type that's designed to underpin the business service, or the next option, which is an application service. The whole idea of a technical service is the underlying technical abilities. So your networking, your router systems, your firewalls, these baseline systems, the storage capacity within the network. And then the third option is the idea of an application service. Now, in this case, it's a weird one in the idea of an application service, but the application service is designed as a logical representation of a deployed stack. So most people will have ServiceNow as a good idea. While you have it as a business application itself, ServiceNow would have multiple application services. So I'd have one for its production environment, one for its test environment, and one for a dev environment. So this works on pretty much every type of system. It uses the standard dev, test, prod makeup. Each one of those is a separate stack and a separate set of infrastructure CIs that delivers that. So by allowing this model to sit in place, we have the ability to construct a whole end-to-end service that links in with individual records. And just to give you a sort of flavor of where these records sit, the records that sit in this dark blue and the green areas are normally manual inputs. They're normally the logical representations of what the service portfolio management people will do. They'll actually add these bits in, and this is where we get the nuanced data, whereas the application and infrastructure CIs can be populated by ServiceNow Discovery or other data sources that you have within the system. So the main thing that we're looking for is this connection between what application service and infrastructure CIs link into which service that we deliver. Now, I normally put this one in because people have this weird idea of understanding the difference between an application and an application service. So the service is a set of individual items that come together to deliver a type of service. So as an example there, you've got an email system, would have a simple front end that most people look in, they plug into their Outlooks, but then those things all run off of a back-end set of servers, internet connections, databases, authentication mechanisms to actually deliver the service of that. Whereas an individual application in ServiceNow's case is one of the instantiations of an application. So you've got Microsoft SQL. So when you're dealing with an email system, if you've got an Exchange system still on board, most people will be 365 now, but there are people who still have that. You'd have your front end servers, which deal with client access. You'd have a set of servers that do database configuration, and you'd have a set of servers that do transport and storage of these messages. So it's mainly about getting this idea of your head that there is a concept of a service, but there's also a concept of an individual application within it. And it's this particular method that allows us to actually deliver true value in and out for the system. Now with CSDM, the good thing is that you don't have to start right at the end. You can start with very, very simple structures that give you the ability to start tracking how you deal with your setup. So very nicely, they've given us a nice little setup to say, each one of the stages has a crawl name. So crawl, walk, run, and fly. So I think a lot of people would be in the crawl stage and would probably have this from a discovery mechanism if they've done previously. But the idea of having a business application record that links to one or more application services record that then links to some configuration items underneath it is the basic stage of saying, yeah, I've got this application and we deliver multiple versions of it, whether it's a test environment or a production environment, and these are the boxes that support it. So that's the kind of basic first stage. You can then look to expand on that by then saying, okay, I've got these individual technical services, whether I'm dealing with firewalls, I'm dealing with network access, I've got DMZs in place, I've got multiple regional offices or regional areas within certain cloud systems like Azure that I want to deal with. Having those in as technical services and technical service offerings that then allow people to request, I want access to a particular type of service, I need this stack to then support it. What you can see around here is you can start to see that as we build out the model, we start to get individual owners. And this is kind of the key part when you're doing the CMDB. There's multiple stakeholders within the system. Multiple people, they all need to get involved with this process to get the most out of it. But also just generally in the CMDB, the amount of people that will access it, depending on who accesses the platform, will be exponential. So we need to make sure that we've got the right people in place to say, this is my part, I own this piece of information. This is the piece of information that I'm going to run and I'm going to take control of. So at the work stage, what we can see is we're starting to get the technology service owners, the network managers, particularly, to come in and say, yep, I'm supporting this particular type of service with these CIs. And then we've got the technology consumer coming in, oh yeah, I want to request access to a particular system or request a new laptop or something. Yeah, we've got a technical service of being able to deliver end user compute devices. Let's deliver those ones in. When you get to the call stage, you then have this idea of the business relationship manager then coming in and saying, right, we're going to start running for this. Where do these services actually deliver value to the business in these stakes? And this is where we start to look at the idea of services, service portfolios, and where ITIL's mechanism starts to come in and says, how do we deliver different types of services for the service onboarding and the service offboarding that we do within those mechanisms. So if you're an ITIL house, this is where the rest of the initial service design stage comes in. Where do we are those bits? How are we offering this to the business? And then finally, in the last stage, we're then saying, okay, enterprise architects are coming in saying, what can my business actually deliver? What is my business capable of doing? What do I use to deliver that? And how do I deliver these to clients? And there's a couple of key things in here that most people don't realize. It's that not only do we have this idea of a portfolio that allows us to say, hi, I'm the service desk and my service desk delivers all of these different services to the business. Being able to group those and show ownership at that top level is a key stakeholder. The other one is this concept of information object. Not very often used within ServiceNow, but is a key part of being able to say, especially if you're in a high-end, high-regulated area like financial services, for example, being able to say, this is the type of data I keep on my consumers or my customers with that, which applications are touching that data set, who's using it, and being able to have that information object in at that stage allows you to create this massively structured system where you can basically have all of these things interacting with different people, all collaborating on the same system at the same time. And just to try and give you a conceptual idea on this one, this is a basic conceptual system of how an SAP financial setup may be done internally within a large service. Because you can see here, we've got a large stack of business domain information. So what's the capabilities of the business? Which applications support that capability and how are they provided in? Which business applications support those other types of applications? So you can see here, this particular financial accounting application is actually made up of 4 other different ones. And each one of those will consume different services. So it's quite complicated and it looks complex, but the idea here is to give you a structure of saying, this is the information about how my business runs. And these are the objects, the physical infrastructure that we use, the applications that deliver it. So when we're trying to build these types of bits and pieces out, the key piece of information that we actually need to try and automate wherever possible is these connections here between the services and their infrastructure CIs. So if I've got an SAP Finance or Prod, I need to know which boxes depend on that, and then which boxes depend on each other. So by offering all these individual things of saying that we say that these servers support these particular applications that then deliver these types of business services to the business, we can then provide a nice whole stack up for it. So based on that, I realize there's a lot of information to take in from when we're first starting. So I'm going to ask the same question again that I did previously. Do we want to rip out or do you want to rebuild it? What's the kind of feeling at the moment in the chat? Based on what I've added in, what's your question? Do you still want to rip it all out and start again? Or do you want to potentially look at retrofitting it? Because you'd be depending on what you could do by according to the diagram, automated tools. Something that David's put in, and I think I better answer that. David's put in the question, there's very little that can be discovered by automated tools according to the diagrams. Yes, you are right. There is, when you're looking at those types of bits, little that you can actually discover. The actual work, most of the time, of understanding how service works is talking to the portfolio guys to understand who supports what. And when you look at these bits and pieces, every time you see an application service, so someone says, I consume this or I consume this, you actually look for those structures, and those structures can be built by either discovery or service mapping or another tool that you can pull information in. Okay. There's a few in there, other questions. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the next slide here. So we got basically our two angles. Do I rip it out or do I retrofit it? So rip out and rebuild, I think is fairly easy in our system. It's the cleanest method you have available. It's going to take you the most amount of data entry work to do because you are going to have to input this data manually. And it's also going to take you the longest amount of time to do because not only do you have to rip it all out, you have to re-implement it again, re-import all that data from whatever systems you're getting it from. It's a pain. It really does take the most amount of time and it costs you the most amount of money with that. I feel like this one, if you're doing a fresh, clean re-implementation, putting the CSDM model in at the beginning is a good investment. When you've got something that's been in, for argument's sake, 3 years, you've got a set of data in there, you've got all that data tied into ITSM-based records, so your incidents, your changes, alert management and other bits, it becomes a lot more difficult to rip it out and rebuild because eventually you then have to touch all these other systems, which again, costs people money and it costs people time. So you're probably going to like my next one. Retrofitting essentially allows you to take whatever you've currently got in the system, what you've got, all your existing CI data source, and where you're getting data sources from, and actually moving it towards this model, whereby the only thing you're actually truly identifying when you do this type of retrofit is saying, what are my application services? Because once you understand which application services and technical services you deliver, the rest of the business services can be done separately as individual tasks. So when we're talking about retrofitting an existing CMDB, I'm going to go into kind of one main area is the idea of data integrations versus discovery. And and then the idea of quality control on top of that. So I think the big question here, data integrations versus discovery, can they work together? Absolutely. Regularly, when I put these types of things in, I will often have more than one source of data, mainly because you will always have situations where discovery cannot access certain things, and you will always have situations where other data sources cannot get to places where discovery can. So understanding the nuance between the two is where you can really, really get some really good information in. So for those of you on a call who haven't dealt with ServiceNow's discovery, it is ServiceNow's network scanning application tool. And the idea here is that you can basically find anything that's got an IP access on it, if it's connected to the network. As long as we can find it on the network from an IP address perspective, we can look to inspect it and then run some programs against it, some sort of instructions to pull information back into ServiceNow and update the CMDB with it. So the one that people normally go into classically is servers, Windows servers and Linux servers. Always a lovely conversation when it comes to Linux servers, but Windows seems to be a lot of easier conversation. But yeah, essentially we look for the device, we log into it, we then say, right, what CPU you got, what hard disks are you running, what's your memory like, what's your current active running processes. That's the key part that people miss on ServiceNow when you're doing discovery, is running the ability to say, what processes am I running and what connections have I got? Because when you're looking at what you're running on those boxes and what you're connecting to, you can get a lovely amount of information that allows you to build a beautiful mesh of all the databases that are talking to each other, the applications that are installed throughout your network, different types, whether they're open source, proprietary applications, how they all talk together. And it also underpins the basis of service mapping. I won't go too heavy into that, but the same technique is used for service mapping, where instead of just saying, here's my big range of IP addresses, go and have a look at it, we say, here's the entry point to my application. This is the website they go to. This is the application, the installed application they turned on, and this is the server it connects to actually do some work with that. How do we move through and do that? By understanding those bits and pieces, we can actually say, I said beautiful mesh, by the way. Sorry, Ali, it is mesh with that rather than mess. I could say a beautiful mess, but then again, we've all seen messy CMDBs, I think, more than anything else. Okay. There are other types of data integrations. There is not just ServiceNow discovery. There are other ways that you can look at these things. And there are other types that will give you such rich information. So, for example, some people have the FlexNet Manager Suite, which is a localized agent installed system. This one allows you to find all of your installed applications and basic config information, but also related to licenses that you have for that software. The classic one that most people have is Microsoft's System Center Configuration Manager, which is an out-of-the-box available integration that allows you to pull all of the boxes that you have on your network that are Windows-based into your CMDB in one hit, which also includes all of the software installations as well. Again, good for software mapping, also good for building connections out. The other part that you can have a look at is other things like Jamf Cloud. It's one that we've looked at recently. It's a system that's used by large enterprises to manage MacBooks in that, and it works fairly similar to SCCM. Because we have the ability to interact with these devices, we can then go through and say, we've got a set of information in there. Let's pull that information down and use that against what we can find from discovery to make sure that we're getting information from both ends. And that way we know we're getting the true stick. But when you've got so many pieces of information touching the same table, you have to make sure that you're getting the right data from the right source in the right field. And that's where data precedence and reconciliation comes into place. It's the key function to make sure that what goes into that table is clean as a whistle. That. So for those of you who don't know about these ones, ServiceNow has a built-in system within their CMDB called data precedence and reconciliation. So the reconciliation rules allow you to say, I've got multiple fields looking at a single table, multiple data sources. So in this case, I've got in the diagram, ServiceNow Discovery, I've got a third-party discovery tool, and I've got potentially import sets being added in. Not only does this use the built-in rules within the CMDB to ensure we're always looking at the same record and that we're not duplicating records that way, we can also go down and say that ServiceNow Discovery has the best fully qualified domain name, but this third-party data source may actually have a more accurate CPU count than ServiceNow Discovery has. So by being able to go down into those individual fields and say for Windows servers on their CPU count, I want it to come from this third-party data source rather than Discovery. So if Discovery tries to push that information in, it says, no, I'm not allowed to do that. So it drops the information rather than adding it in. So this allows us to truly control every single area of the CMDB, control each one at a single field level. And that is complemented by data precedence. So for every single table that you want to add information into, you can specify which data sets are allowed to touch each class at the top levels. So that if you've had something that's been updated by, for example, an import set in this case, which is at order 200, and then ServiceNow Discovery comes in and finds that actually, no, I made changes to this record, want to make changes to this record. I can say, oh, this one's a higher order. Therefore, whatever it says overrides what the import set says. Conversely, if you've got something that's done by ServiceNow as the last data source that touched the record, and then an import set wants to override that information, doesn't really allow you to get past that one. So we stop it. We don't allow that type of thing to happen. So I think in this space, it becomes a really good idea to be able to use a combination of two areas. ServiceNow's Discovery's ability to see relationships between devices and the ability of other monitoring and inventory-based systems like SCCM to get quality, deep level information about both CIs, to combine them both into the same data set and make sure that you've got a really high class set of data, so that if you were to employ something like service mapping to map individual application services, or if you just wanted to say, yeah, I know these 5 boxes are part of my production service because these are the ones I make every single type of change to, then when people start to look at this concept of adding in business services or other technical services to support that and building out that level of information with business capabilities, you can actually see this direct kind of correlation of we're only looking at one point, which is, does that box support this service? Once you get to that point, the system becomes it becomes vastly easier to manage, because these precedences and reconciliations, once you've built them in place, once you've added them in and constructed them the way that you feel, yes, this particular data source is worth more than this particular data source, you can then almost set and stay and just let it import and do the bits and pieces that it wants to do. Once you've got to that bit, you can then say, fantastic, great. I'm just looking at the services at the top, and then I'm going to manage that level of data. And especially when you're dealing with CMDBs that can reach 2, 3, 4, 5 million records, with that, only dealing with one table or two out of that makes your life a lot easier from a management perspective. So have we got any questions about the precedence and reconciliation part? Because for me, that's one of the killer features of running your CMDB, is making sure that you've gone through and found your setup for your data precedence, your reconciliation. What sources are touching my CMDB? Am I getting just import sets from spreadsheets? Am I getting clean data from data sources? My preference always is to avoid manual imports wherever possible and let these other intelligent systems that are either have an agent installed on my box somewhere or are doing active scanning in areas that Discovery can't reach to get the quality level of information on a CI, pull that information in for us and allow Discovery and service mapping to add the extra quality information about which databases are talking to each other, which applications are installed elsewhere, how are these applications talking to each other. Okay, almost near the end, so don't worry. So the next bit we've got is this idea of quality control. So we've got to this idea of we're letting our services people who deliver these services or manage these services or architect them get to a point of saying, right, these are the types of services and capabilities that our business delivers. Therefore, we build out these types of relationships to say that I have this bit here or this bit here, or how these ones work and talk to each other. We've got this idea of our application CIs being populated by both Discovery and these other data sources. And from that perspective, we've got this point where we've got 3 different areas all touching the CMDB at the same point in time. This can become a recipe for disaster unless you have quality control in place. And from a ServiceNow perspective, we've got 2 main areas. The first one is arguably the most undervalued application within ServiceNow, and that's the data certification plugin. What this allows you to do is essentially set up scheduled or on-demand validations of your CMDB. And then you can look to perform specific, against specific fields on specific tables, look for certain types of information. So a key one for this is your business services table. With that, do the owners register on that? Are they still active on ServiceNow? Are we missing that key part of saying that the service owner's gone through the leavers process? Nobody's updated the CMDB to say, oh, yeah, oh, actually that person's left, who's taking over with them? Or we've got this case of how many people are down as owning a server or having a computer assigned to them who are no longer part of the business. You know, and we've got these things are saying, oh, we've got a particular box that hasn't talked to us in a long time. Why are we not getting the discovery information? Why is this not coming through these bits? So the ability to use data certification is a powerful way of making sure that the human side is validating what the machine is trying to do. A lot of people outside of these ones, that's a big topic in IT, is the idea of process automation, robotics. Where are the humans going to be missing from the process? You know, are the machines going to take over? And I feel like this particular part is where the humans can monitor the robots, because we all know robots and processes like this are really good at doing standardized access in and out, a standardized process constantly, which is something, you know, let's face it, most people, anyone who's ever worked on a production line knows that it's arguably the most boring and dull and draining job in the world to do that. So we let the robots do that. But the humans have the ability to see nuanced connections. They can see these things that nobody else can see, that a robot wouldn't even be able to see, even with artificial intelligence. And it's that part where I feel like data certification, and the next part that I'll come on to, is the key ways of making sure that humans are involved and doubling down on the quality, which is the one thing that they are capable of doing more than anything else. So the idea of this process is that you have a schedule. This schedule shows certain fields to people. It picks saying, okay, I want to validate all of the fields relating to ownership on a particular record, put them up into one data great big list, check what times, what frequency schedules, and more importantly, who should be dealing with this particular quality of information. And then based on that schedule, it then creates a task for that person. And it shows them that minimized quality data set to say, these are all the records that relate to this particular task. We need you to validate whether or not they're correct. Now, sometimes that can be a bit of a pain, but you'll have certain situations where you'll have lots of records, and most situations where you'll have a minimum amount of records. And that's the key part, to get to a point where you've got 1 or 2 records that somebody's having to verify on a regular basis. Having people do this on a regular basis is a really, really good way of getting people engaged with the process, getting them engaged in actually dealing with their data in a CMDB. It's their data. Doesn't matter whether a robotic process put it in place or someone filled in a spreadsheet and uploaded it. It's still their data. It relates to something that they own. So by using this, we can actually force them to say, you know what, you own this data. You need to take it on board. Crack on. The second part is the CMDB Health Dashboard. And this is, again, one of those things where, again, we're just looking at quality control of these things going forward. The idea is to take basic things such as, do we have a complete record? Is a record compliant with the right level of information? Is the information in there correct? Is it too stale? Has it been left over and orphaned? And by validating those tables, we can actually say, here, we're hitting a certain percentage score point. This is where we really want to hit to deliver value. Being able to go in and look at these things and say, oh, there's one graph that says all of these things have been orphaned. There's no relationships to anything. Why is there no relationships? Because this allows us to then double check on what data is coming in from our integrations and what data is coming in from discovery. So again, it's that idea of the top level bits and pieces. So with the idea of the CMDB Health, again, it's the idea of we can go in and say, right, we've got remediation tasks. We're going to say, we've got all these orphaned boxes. They've got no relationship to them. Where should they be going? Who should be dealing with these bits and pieces? And you can actually program the health dashboards to create these types of tasks to say, I've got, argument's sake, your name is down as the owner for these 50 Windows servers. They're all sitting in the CMDB. They've got no relationships to anything else. They haven't been touched in a long time. Why are they sitting there? And this allows people to go in and say, oh, actually, no, my information's incorrect. So this gives you the idea of the cycle that we deal with when we're dealing with CMDB health remediation tasks. The idea is that we go in, we enable a task, we create a workflow for these people to say, yeah, when we hit this level, we hit a bunch of CIs that have this level of bits. We'll create a dashboard job to say, we've got all these bits that are stale. They haven't been touched in 90 days, or we've got a bunch of things in here that are not related to anything else. Here's your task. This is your person who needs to deal with that. And it creates this virtuous circle of bits, because as the data is updated in a CMDB, so it could be a case of those 50 boxes I mentioned earlier. It could be, actually, no, we binned all that lot because they're all physical boxes. They're no longer virtual. So we drop them out. Whereas over time, that essentially cleans the data for you. So you've then got this idea of the discovery system populating data and relationships. You've got these data integrations providing rich information about your CIs. And you've got humans coming in and saying, yeah, this is valid, this is valid, this is not valid. We need to go and fix this. And allow you to go in and knock these bits and pieces out. So based on the bits that we've heard so far, I'll come to my last slide. I'm going to ask the same question again. When it comes to your CMDB, do you want to rip it out and rebuild it from scratch and put the effort in there? Or do you want to retrofit it and use the tools that are built into the system to give you the quality level of information that you need and a usable CMDB that people are actively managing and engaged with? On that note, that is the end of my presentation with that. So at this point, we've got some time left over. I will open myself up to questions.
Well, I think the popular notion here seems to be retrofit is the word of the day.
Well, it looks like nobody wants to get stuck in dealing with all of those different bits that you want to do. I mean, let's face it, you got a CMDB of about 3 million records, and you have to repopulate that information. Do you really want to be the one who's having to sit there and figure out where all that information sits and pull that information in where it's retrofitting? You're getting people to get involved in the process. What we're actually delivering to the business, and where are we dealing with? What's supporting us delivering that? Because if we've got stuff in there that's not supporting us delivering a business, why should it be in the CMDB in the first place? And that's the key part we need to look at. Got a question from Roger about the remediation task piece. Yep, so remediation tasks, they are very nuanced per customer. They tend to be set up with a standardized set of works that come out of the box with ServiceNow. So you've got this concept of completeness, correctness, staleness, and being orphaned with that. So I'll go through them in stages. The completeness, you actually have to go in and say to them, for every single server that I have in place, I want a name, I want a serial number, I want an IP address, I want a operating system version, and have that as a standardized set to say for every class that you've got, this is the information that has to be on every single record with that. And then that relates to your completion part. So as you go in, again, it's a lot more planning in this idea of actually attaching it and going through, but getting those things of understanding, what do I actually need on every single record? Absolutely, I can't afford not to have. That's it for your completeness. Correctness is slightly different to completeness. So for example, you can look at the case of, oh, this server belongs to this department, but the owner is actually somebody who's not part of that department. That's an incorrect piece of information. That's one of the key parts you need to look at. That's probably the best example I can give you of that one. Staleness kind of speaks for itself. Whenever you update something in ServiceNow, there's two key fields. There's an updated, but there's also a most recent discovery field. And that most recent discovery field is updated every time an automated data source touches ServiceNow CMDB. So that's the discovery, any integrations that you've got. If it's automated in place, it updates that most recent discovery field. So by using a combination of those two, you can see how often those things are touched. Now, argument's sake, your networking gear, you maybe want to check that it's there every 30 to 60 days. If you're dealing with a laptop at the end, let's face it, people are going to be in and out of the office so often that trying to do staleness against a laptop is going to be difficult. But you may want to pull that information from an automated agent such as SCCM on that, which is always going to have connections to that boxes to make sure that we're getting information from there. Servers tend to be quite static. So if I haven't seen a server on a discovery scan in more than 10 days, I'd want to know why with that one. And then the last one is a weird one, but until once you get your head around the concept, it's actually quite useful. And that is the orphan. When you are dealing with a box inside ServiceNow and it has been updated by discovery especially, you should have relationships in there. It should be related that it depends on some other box, that it has an application running on it, that it's making active connections between boxes. If you don't have relationships against it, it's orphaned. So why should it be in the CMDB, especially if you're running a CSDM model where your CIs are supposed to be done against your individual services? If they're there to support a service and they're orphaned, why is that? Why have they had that missed out? And it's normally something fairly simple has gone in place, or somebody's made some manual changes that you don't know about. Okay, some others, I hope that answers your question, by the way. Couple more bits. I think David's got a good idea. Rip out what is my customers want, what my customers want as the scope has changed, and they want to start with good trusted data that is well categorized and presented. Yes, it's a little known fact that ripping out is good in some contexts. And I think the best context is if you're re-platforming ServiceNow. So this happens to people, especially if they've been customers for a long time. You know, if you've had your instance for more than 5-6 years, you know, you've had all kinds of development done to that instance over time. The thing that you really want to have a look at is it still fit for purpose, and how far is it from out of the box? And if you're replatforming because of that, rebuilding a CMDB from scratch is a really good way to go, because then you can clear out all of the old information and start from something clean from scratch. And that's probably in my case, that's probably the only time I'd actually consider ripping something out. 99% of the time, it will be retrofitting from my perspective. Okay, have a look for any more questions. Definitely think that's the key, looking at what requirements and scope are. Rip out, replace doesn't mean discard. Absolutely, yeah. You know, you can literally move it into some type of inactive state where you just want it to sit there so that you don't lose track of any ITSM information related to it, and then just start again from scratch. You know, that can be relatively easy to do when planned out.
So I think you've talked enough, James. We've
Thanks for reminding me that, mine.
Yeah, we've just tired you out. That's what it is. I mean, but I think what that's really highlighted is that, you know, the CMDB, it's still a complex beast, and it's still something we need to wrestle to get control with, and something that you need expert help and guidance with. There are a lot more tools out there that can help you with that journey now than there were like 10 or 15 years ago. And it's a different journey as well, because the items within there are totally different, and we've got between 300,000 and over 1 million CIs from some of the people sitting on the calls today. So it's no wonder that they want to get a handle on that information. So I want to just say, you know, really thanks very much for your time today, and thanks everybody for coming. There's a full-on ITOM workshop next week. If anybody is interested in a full 3-hour session at what ITOM can do for you, join that. And the week after that, we have got 2 esteemed colleagues joining us to talk about building a business case for ITOM. So a couple of our customers are coming along to that as well. So more information is on the website or in the ITOM Hub group. If you're not in the ITOM Hub group, direct message me and I'll get that one sorted out for you. But other than that, thanks for your time today. I'm going to go back to thunderstorms in Scotland. You can go back to your heat and keep that down in London.
That's great. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for coming, guys. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.